Star Trek, The Nerdy Frontier. These are the discussions of the Good Times Society. Their continuing mission, to explore each episode, to seek out new topics and ridiculous observations, to boldly watch what they've already watched before. Xander, I have a moral question for you. I think I know the answer to the question that if you were a Starfleet officer and your family came to you and said, you need to marry this person, I think we know that you wouldn't leave a career behind in Starfleet very easily.
Is he hot?
He's stupid hot.
Has he got a mullet?
He does, but it's much nicer.
So
Here's my question for you. What would this marriage have to entail to get you to be pulled away from Starfleet? Keeping in mind that Becca and I will be officiating this wedding naked.
Yeah, that's the only condition.
I will be mute, though, and I will be sign language officiating.
My only condition is that everyone's got to be naked at the wedding.
Okay.
That's all it's going to take.
That's a great way to do a wedding, you know?
Even if you don't know the guy.
It's such a purifying experience.
Yeah. That's what the marriage is for, to get to know him.
This is going to be a real easy episode for you then, because Haven is about Counselor Troi's arranged marriage. Holy cow.
Holy cow.
It's surprising to me because Betazoid seem pretty forward-thinking. They seem very intuitive, very in touch with what people want and pursuing that, and yet they still have arranged marriages? What?
Well, yeah. I think that this is fascinating because you can look at it from two different perspectives, the way that I see it anyway. One is from this earthly perspective of like arranged marriages being this sort of construct of an older time that feels like chains and whatever. But if you grew up in a society where people could read each other's thoughts and like polyamory was a thing and just a part of society, you would need some way for the species to generate, like to continue. So why not make two genetically perfect matches to ensure that the best possible offspring could happen? If it's not connected with romance and love as we understand it, but it's more of a physical thing, why not have a ceremony around it and involve the family?
You know, for them having a genetic perfection for each other, they had no chemistry.
That's true.
None at all. And I had a lot of confusion at first. I wasn't sure. So the arranged husband's parents were the first to arrive in the teleportation room.
The Millers.
The Millers.
There's something very uncomfortable here that I'm just going to call out, that the father's name was Stephen Miller, yeah, which is like Trump's right-hand super white supremacist advisor. And I had just written
Stephen
down
Miller. Oh, that's true.
Because I didn't understand that those were not Deanna Troi's parents. I thought that's who it was at first, and I wrote, "Oh my God, they're so white." And then it was like Stephen Miller.
Do you know who Steve Miller is, Becca?
Oh, like Steve Miller Band.
Yeah, Steve Miller Band. Yeah, the other Steve Miller. That's who I thought I was thinking of.
Poor Steve Miller. The band for having his name tarnished in this way.
Well, so the Millers arrive along with Lwaxana Troi, and it turns out that we even forgot about the talking box with all the jewels that came out of it.
The dowry box.
For being so fancy and posh as this wedding is supposed to be, that thing just farted out all of those gems right onto the transporter floor, and it's just like, here, this is a fortune.
Well, remember, that comes from the humans, so that's the human custom.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And that actor that played the face, I can't remember his name, but he's the Ferengi who plays Quark on DS9.
Armin Shimmerman.
Armin Shimmerman, and he's one of the Ferengi from the Outpost episode.
Awesome. Yeah, I was wondering why they used that face. So now it makes sense that was like, oh, let's just get that guy in here. He can do it.
Another Wizard of Oz type moment, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The whole thing felt very like all of this first season is very original series in the pacing of it and sort of the dilemmas that show up. Because I feel like original series only got one season, they're trying to sort of repaint the same sort of moral quandaries in this new generation, and you can see that in the casting of Majel Barrett as Lwaxana Troi.
Oh, I forgot. You told us that in our first episode, and I totally forgot that this is Majel Barrett. Interesting.
So quick note, I don't want to check you too much.
Oh, yeah.
But, the original series has 3 seasons.
3 seasons. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You're right.
But they were short. They were canceled. So they definitely didn't get to do their full complement of ideas. So we do see a lot of that stuff recycled in. And Majel Barrett is not necessarily a recycling because she's actually Gene Roddenberry's wife, right?
Yeah. And also the voice of the computer.
Mm-hmm.
So we learned so much about Troi in this episode.
Yeah.
And finally noticed the black contacts because on Majel Barrett they're way more noticeable because I think she just has like a little bit lighter hair, so you really notice those black contacts that just are a little bit terrifying.
But they look natural on Marina Sirtis, the actress for Deanna Troi.
Yeah, they do. They look good on her. And then the accent, Xander, that you have told us so much about the origins of. There's this throwaway line of, "Oh, your accent is so much like your father," and I wrote, "Will it be?"
Let's keep that in mind for when we meet Troy's father.
And when we meet the fiance, Wyatt, he's a little bit homeless looking is what I wrote down. Really want him to cut that mullet that you mentioned. And then he gives her a mood ring rose.
See, actually, I kind of liked his mullet. Like, as far as mullet goes, that was like the Cadillac of mullets, right?
It was glossy. They probably...
shine.
Yeah, there's some mousse in there, I bet.
You could probably open it up on the freeway.
Yeah, and it would look even better.
What I was concerned about is, like, he didn't really say much of anything, and this is, like, his future wife, and he's just standing there looking kind of slack-jawed and holding a picture that he drew in a flower that he's going to give her. It felt, like, less mature than even Wesley Crusher in terms of love.
Well, we find out later that he was very surprised because she wasn't the woman he had literally dreamed of his entire life.
Yeah.
What a blow to anybody who's like meeting their betrothed and they're like, "Oh, I have all of these pictures that I carry with me of this hot blonde
with the Farrah Fawcett locks
on the Aquanet."
No, that's why he had to have the long hair, because he thought he'd be meeting her. If he was too clean cut, they wouldn't look like a good match, you know.
Right.
You start to look like your partner. He needed more Aquanet.
So Picard welcomes Lwaxana onto the ship, carries her suitcase for her, and one of the more comedic moments.
I love it.
Yeah, I like Picard actually getting to do a little bit of hammy comedy a little bit. That was nice. The one problem when I had was that one of the few things he says to Troi is congratulations when he leaves her, as if he doesn't know that this is not something she really wants. It's pretty obvious she's distressed this entire time.
But again, I think this is a prime example of Picard's patience. This is a species custom that I don't understand, but I know it's customary for me to say congratulations in a situation like this. And with him not bringing up, "Oh, this must be so hard for you," it seems obvious, and they have a connection. So him bringing it up would just be pouring salt on the wound. He knows that she has to go through with this, and he sees how demanding Lwaxana is and totally empathizes and does really accommodate everything that Lwaxana wishes for, putting his captaincy aside, which I think is just amazing.
As a kid, I found that really annoying. I didn't like Lwaxana Troi. I thought she was interfering with the ship's operations. I was a very business-like child, I will admit.
Yeah.
But now I like her a little bit more, especially as an adult, and I get her charm a little bit. I think she grows later on in the series too, and she becomes a little less of an asshole, because she's pretty much slamming everybody she sees in this episode. She's bemoaning human culture constantly. She's putting everybody down. It's not a charismatic portrayal, although she has charm. She's not like exuding it. She's kind of holding it above everybody, right?
I say boo to Lwaxana Troi. I'm not into this character. I love when Deanna Troi freaks out and throws a temper tantrum at her and finally throws in her face. She's not for me.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I see that and I totally agree with you, and I think they flesh her out a little bit more because she came on as the quote-unquote monster of the week, the problem to solve of this, or one of the problems to solve of this episode. And again, we see a solid like A plot B plot happening that sort of coincide with each other pretty nicely, but with her as a foil to bring out this aspect of Troi, who is this calm, collected counselor. To see Troi get emotional is a treat for the audience and shows this dynamic of character as well. But I also wanted to show that at this time in television, having such a strong woman come in and be this leader role and forceful, also in contrast to this, what you mentioned before, this sort of meek male betrothed person, you know, it would be so easy to see it be the demanding father that comes in and the meek daughter that is betrothed, that we see this sort of gender roles flipped for the time. Now we sort of see past that, but there is something to be said for why we think of Lwaxana as, you know, sort of over the top and controlling, when really she hides it behind this honesty and candor that is quote unquote how Betazoids do it. They speak their mind.
Yes and no to breaking gender roles, because when you think of, we're going to have an episode about a wedding, you think of an overbearing mother.
That's true. That's true.
And she's also a very counterintuitive character, because you think of a character that can read minds, which of course all Betazoids can, but this is the Betazoid we meet. Right. Then you would think, well, she must be empathetic, but she's not.
Yeah, this whole thing felt anachronistic to me from a future standpoint. It's like, of all the things we haven't solved, you guys still don't have arranged weddings figured out. Like, it felt like a stretch, especially with such a progressive society as Starfleet, that Troi wouldn't easily just shirk her duty. In fact, she rarely explores that. She's just like, it's tradition, I got to do it. That's pretty much what it boils down to, as I recall.
Yeah, we're gonna run into this with Troi as a character, also with Worf as a character. It's an exploration that they did with Spock in the original series of what does it mean to be half human, half alien in some way. What responsibilities become important for the human aspect of the character, and what are important for the alien aspect. For Betazoids, we don't know much about it. We don't know much about their traditions and how sort of you know, we could be, these traditions could be as easy as like farming or as unimportant as, you know, oh, these two people are just going to live together for a while. It's sort of an arranged thing. We're attaching a lot of what we think of when it comes to marriage and weddings, I think, and that they do it too, because it's being written in the 90s. But, you know, I think that this is really powerful in the way that Deanna just sort of accepts, like, this is tradition, and who am I to step in front of this and say no when I haven't even tried it? Maybe it's something that will work out. Maybe this is a path that I do need to go on. And I think that openness, I think, is really compelling.
Yeah, and I like, let's talk about the scene where they are first alone together. Yeah. Because as you guys mentioned, there's no chemistry, but they both are like, down for whatever this is gonna be. Yeah, I guess you're pretty cool, right? Wow, you're a great artist, even though you've drawn this woman that isn't me. And then, as you were mentioning the A and B plot that we talked so much about, this is when they finally start to tie those together. I like an A and B plot that exists separately, and then there's something that knots them together at the end, which in this episode is the Terellians.
Yeah.
And of course, when we see this woman, we think, we're probably going to meet her in person.
Yeah,
we're going to meet sure. This is how the wedding doesn't work out, obviously. We know that. But how do we get there?
It's Chekhov's sketch, or Chekhov's portrait sketch of a woman. It'll come back later.
Yeah, you've got to fire off the portrait sketch before the end of the play.
It did feel very obvious of like, okay, I've drawn who I should be with. We'll get to this shortly.
But I do like how the character deals with it of like, well, this is just a childish fantasy. Pay no attention to this. You know, whether he really feels that way or not, Deanna knows, because she can feel how he feels. And they both have this adult conversation that, especially when you're writing a sitcom style show or a soap opera style show, could have easily been blown out of proportion and been dramatic with things smashing and flying around. But it was very controlled and like, here's what this is. Here's what we do. This is the communication.
I find Deanna to be an unreliable feeler, though, because she straight up like says to Riker, she's like, "You want to be a starship captain more than anything." He's like, "Well, I want more than that," and she's like, "Okay, but you want me?"
Maybe she's being manipulative.
He's like, "No, I want lots of things." She's like, "Come dance at my wedding." Like, and then later she tells Wyatt, she's like, he wants to be a starship captain. That's his thing. She's like, you didn't listen.
Yeah.
I don't know. As a woman that loves to play mind games, as we all do, obviously, I think she doesn't want to get married. She loves Riker, and she just wants him to be there for the reason that she cares deeply about him, as she says on the holodeck. And this is her way of talking him out of being in love with her. Like, you don't really love me. You want to be a starship captain. That's your thing. It's not saying I'm reading your feelings. It's saying, like, this is what's best.
This really became an episode of Dawson's Creek pretty quickly for Riker because he was kind of going off and brooding on his own about this. Like, he, like, stormed out of the conference room after mentioning that we were going to the engagement party or whatever. Like,
yeah, there's probably solid 3 storm-offs in the episode for him.
I laughed real hard when she found him on the holodeck and he's looking at a fake sunset.
Yeah.
It's a really pretty fake sunset, though.
We just load program 1, and that's like what the holodeck came with.
Load sad.exe. So I guess this weird betrothal slowly happens. We have wedding traditions. We have antics at the engagement party. The gong was hilarious.
Picard has a great line where there's petty squabbles, and he says, "As the captain, I say at a ceremony there are no more arguments, so arguments are now settled."
I figured that scene was actually 3 minutes too long, and then they're on set, and they're like, okay, we got to figure this out. So Picard, I want you to order everybody to just be chill, okay? And action.
I'm going to do this with my family on Thanksgiving, for sure.
Also,
ask them,
clutch move.
Ask them to please continue the petty banter, because it's fascinating. Or the petty bickering, rather.
Yeah, I'll have a tag team with my sister Lisa, who may or may not be listening to this episode, and she can play the data role.
There it is.
Yeah.
So, bio-warfare is what destroyed the Terellians, we learn in a very exposition-heavy
what a hard turn.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to keep us moving, and I remember that we actually kind of skipped over the Terellians' whole story, which was a big chunk of that third act, right?
Yeah.
So we find out that they, I guess, theoretically are extinct, but there's this ship that's just drifting towards Haven, a planet that's been rumored to have healing properties, right?
With beautiful French women, which were reminiscent. Riker was listening to these French harpists that were miniaturized at the beginning of the episode, and then it looks a lot like the woman that they're speaking to in the bridge, who is like the leader of Haven.
You say listening, accent, right? I say looking, because
he was looking at them.
He was really staring for a while. I mean, he did close his eyes. Also, that music sounded like NES music from like a temple in Legend of Zelda or something.
It also really sounded like something from Sirenscape. The tabletop audio thing. Anyway,
y'all don't listen to enough harp music.
You're right. My current theory is they had the green screen set up and they had some women in some like robes, Grecian robes, and they're like, well, these could be the hologram and the council that they contact.
Absolutely.
Love that. Data circles the room like a buzzard. I loved that line. I liked the little plant gag as well. It seemed so silly and stupid, but then I still laughed at it. I can't believe it worked on me. And it's so simple. It's another example of you mentioned Xander, with them just using props as best they can with what low budgets they've got, and they just took some vines and like, it's an alien.
You like pets, right?
It's gonna scare the human woman mother.
Yeah.
And then there was squabbles about our favorite Steve Miller having thoughts about, oh shoot, what's Troy's mom's first name?
Lwaxana.
Lwaxana's super bae. He wants to see her naked, all this stuff. It's real rebel-rousing, real trying to start a hair-pulling fight in the middle of this wedding rehearsal dinner, and I don't understand why Lwaxana's so ready to start this fight. What is her intention? Because she set up this arranged marriage.
I feel like she's just written as obnoxious in this episode, and they forgot to make her redeeming or give her a rationale, unfortunately.
Yeah, why does she want to piss this woman off?
They sort of justify it a little bit at the end when she makes this sort of lewd comment about Picard's thoughts about her, and even though like they're probably not true, it shows that the telepath's favorite way to mess with non-telepaths is to like frame them for improper thoughts, and you can see this sort of throughout the episode. That's one of Lwaxana's favorite things to do in stirring trouble with the Millers and like saying, oh, those thoughts, or he finds me attractive or whatever. It could be candor. It could be, a fleeting thought that they'd had that she tends to focus on and joke around with. But it's just a different sort of sense of humor is how they justify it, but it doesn't exactly work.
Yeah, I feel like they don't quite get there close enough. Now, I'm wondering in future episodes if Becca's opinion will evolve about Lwaxana. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm hoping it does.
She pisses off Deanna Troi enough that Troi explodes. And I know you liked that moment, Becca, but for me it seemed a little fast for the ship's counselor to just lose her mind and then shove the gong over on her way out like a tantrum. But I guess this is
Do you not know about mothers?
Yeah.
There's a lot of history there.
If we're talking Dawson's Creek, I guess this is appropriate, though.
Right.
Do you know how easy it is for me to be playing a board game with my mother and then explode because she just gives my sister free money because she wanted to be nice?
Well, that's why we can't have nice gongs around this place.
Yeah, we can't have nice gongs.
That's, I think, exactly what they're trying to show, Becca, is that normally the counselor of the ship is so calm and collected in dealing with other people's emotions. We get to see someone who knows exactly which buttons to push to make her flip out. And I think that was a really interesting choice for the character.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Before we move on from the rehearsal dinner scene, hair on point, we got Troi with the extension ponytail.
Crusher.
Yeah, Crusher with a really nice little low bun with lots of volume.
Yeah.
And Yar is just went ham with the moose. And
to the nines.
Love it all.
Yep.
Becca, in my notes, I literally wrote, Becca's going to love this hair.
Thank you for understanding me.
Yeah, I loved Yar's going for the full 80s rocker look. That was great.
So cool.
So the Terellians actually make contact finally. After being pulled into a tractor beam, their leader says, before I ask about the tractor beam, you got a guy named Wyatt on board?
Yeah.
More importantly...
It's an interesting way to start the call, but it turns out their entire survival depends on this doctor that they have dreamed up, apparently. Right. And his betrothed, or his beloved, I should say, from his dreams is this wonderfully cheekboned woman. That's all I really remember from her is the curvature of her face.
Yeah.
And that amazing blonde hair. But yeah, we see Ariana in her first communication is pretty much her and her belly.
Yeah. Her abs. If you picture sort of any sort of swimsuit model of Sports Illustrated of the 80s with huge blonde hair, that's pretty much what this is. On a car in a bikini or something.
I feel like she was drawn first, then they cast her.
Yeah.
Totally. What I wrote, I was why didn't... So they get off this first initial call where they don't look like the warrior type. They don't look like they're going to attack. They're all in blue crop tops. Yeah. And then they're just send Wyatt. He comes to the bridge and they're like, okay, cool, bye. And they don't really talk about this. What's the next move here? How do you know about me? Why do you seem to know so much more about our astral connection than I do? And Wyatt's okay, cool, there she is.
Yep. Yeah. It's a
do
big
they
old
explain
mess.
it at that point at all, or do they just say, I've dreamed about you,
call.
I've dreamed about you too, right?
Yeah, it's okay, we've been dreaming it. You're the one I've been talking to in my dreams. Okay, well, we'll talk later, bye.
Again, I think it's another symptom of some of these early episodes where they're well, we got 8 minutes left to resolve this, so let's crunch this in.
Because eventually it leads to my next note, which is dude, don't beam over to an infected ship for some girl you don't even know. FaceTime first or something.
Right. Now, something I thought about later was everybody on board the Terellian ship was down with her dreams. They put her drawings, which were not as good as his. She's not a very good artist.
No.
They hung them prominently in the ship. They all believed in this destiny that she had to meet this person, and nobody believed Wyatt or cared about his dream. It was nah, you got an arranged marriage, kid.
Right.
I would love it if Wyatt beamed over to that ship and she's a terrible artist and it's pretty much just stick figures with different sized eyes and stuff like that. But with clearly she drew a mullet on each of them. But she got his carpet shirt right, So that's about all she can get shape wise.
Wait, she just drew a triangle for a torso and then that's what his sweater was.
Which is what his sweater was, exactly, yeah. And it's in space crayon, which you can just tell. They never evolved beyond that.
It's that glitter crayon.
I wrote down it was a very Wesley sweater.
Yeah. Oh, it looks very Wesley. I have one thing I also want us to keep an eye on for future episodes, which is that this is one of the not the first time, I don't think, and it won't be the last, where someone beams off of the Enterprise without the Enterprise's permission.
Yeah.
And they're constantly being alerted on the bridge that someone beamed over, and Picard's like, lock it out. And they're like, it's too late.
Can't.
And it's like, close the doors.
Yeah.
Like, you guys are the Enterprise. You guys need to lock it down.
Yeah, put two-factor authentication on that. You know?
Right.
It's like, you should have learned the first time to set up the extra protocol.
Yeah, we need to really put some security measures in place. And so I want to keep an eye out for more instances of just people beaming over and we realizing it a second too late.
Yeah.
And that poor transporter guy that got stabbed.
Hypo-sprayed.
Who even knows what was in that syringe that made him pass out? He might be dead, but...
He might be.
Yeah, the doctor killed him just to get over to the dream girl.
I guess he is a doctor, so,
Hippocratic what?
So Wyatt beams over and he's decided to live his life with these 8 people.
Right. So this is what I really want to bring up, though, this parallel between the two. You've got this sort of 2 stories of manifest destiny. You've got the story of Deanna Troi, who's living her life on a starship as a counselor, who is told due to Betazoid traditions beyond her control, she's being forced to live with and dedicate her life to this other person who's a complete stranger. Now we've got Wyatt's version of this, where you've got a whole sort of alien race of essentially humans. As soon as you accept this fate, you're going to be infected by this disease. You cannot go back to your family. You're ripped from your life and your job, essentially, and your whole life will be creating a cure for this race it was prophesied for you to do that. Like, he has no choice in the matter. So it's this arranged marriage, or it's both.
Yeah, well, Wyatt's destiny was foretold. Dude was marrying someone against his will, no matter what.
Right.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. He was so willing to give up his life that how come they never discussed the possibility of him just living on the Enterprise? They could have used a second doctor.
Yeah. Well, and this brings up the core tenet of Star Trek, and I think we may have heard it in the past, but it's the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. If he can help these 8 people survive and create a cure for this virus, is that worth his giving up his happiness when he's been dreaming about this woman anyway? For Troi, is it worth giving up these cultures of her heritage to continue her path on the Starfleet officer, or acknowledge it and just go along with it? It's both. Like, does that benefit the culture or the genetic offspring that might happen with Wyatt and Deanna?
Did we ever learn what genetically was compatible about them? Because I recall Lwaxana just saying, Steve Miller came up to me and reminded me I made a vow to give away my kid to his kid. Like, how did you forget that? Like, were you guys just drunk on Romulan ale one night and just made that choice?
That's illegal.
Yeah, they're Betazoids. They drink that kind of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, they must have some, what's it called? 32andMe or whatever.
33, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, right.
You're missing.
That's a pretty important number. They just did this test and they were like, let's just decide this now for these kids. But that must be how it is, and that must have been how Betazoid marriages were performed. Although it is Betazoid and human hybrids. So
there we go. Now we're getting into the Trek discussion. Can you imagine how excited so Deanna's father is human and had a baby with Lwaxana Troi, who is a Betazoid, having Deanna Troi, who is half human, half Betazoid. Now, to follow within the Betazoid traditions of arranged marriage, you can understand how excited her father would be for her getting matched with a full-blooded human, thus progenerating this hybrid of Betazoid and human genealogy. So you could see why they would want to enforce this, and why it might be, if he is still alive or not, it's still unclear on her father, like where he is right now. But you could see why they would want to push this forward, and why it might be important for the future of human and Betazoid relationships.
Interesting that their sorting hat that they put on her as a baby would come up with a human.
Right. Huh. But it could just be whatever they were casting that day, and this guy looked hot and we love his mullet, so let's put him in as a betrothal option.
Yeah,
who
absolutely.
knows?
Well, I give this episode 1 gong out of too many.
No, there's some great scenes that we didn't talk about. There is Deanna Troi and Wyatt when they have their very, very tame kiss on the deck. That should have told us enough right there. Yeah. And then he has more chemistry with Lwaxana, and she has a great line that doesn't have to do with the theme of destiny and arranged marriages so much and tradition, but she says all lifeblood is bound together, which is really interesting because that's the heart of Hindu philosophy and the whole idea of reincarnation and the idea of karma, which is that we are all living one life, and so we will live every life. And I wrote it down because I love that philosophy, and that was the one thing that was redeeming about Lwaxana to me.
The way that she framed it, too, was so beautiful in that the concept that you need to understand is so simple that you don't understand it. That we are all connected. We're all living these different lives, but we're all one thing is such a simple thing to say, but it's hard to grasp, And I think it's amazing that they brought up this sort of concept.
Hey, that's what they're great at doing. Bringing up awesome concepts, whether or not they're executed to our liking at this stage in season 1.
That's true.
So did you guys enjoy this episode? How many gongs do you give it?
I would give it 3 gongs out of 5, I would say. I think it's a solid episode. I think it's better than like an average because I like some of the themes that they explore. I like sort of this concept of polyamory, of like your mind is too small to accept that you could be in love with multiple people and that could be okay. And like nudity is kind of a fun thing to play with too, but like people's comfort level with bodies, who knows? So yeah, 3 gongs out of 5.
Yeah, I'll give it 4 gongs out of 6. Just because I really like the idea of a nude wedding.
Right.
Well, I think we'll actually get a taste of that in a future episode.
Maybe.
Speaking of future episodes, next week we have The Big Goodbye, where Captain Picard and some of the Enterprise crew get stuck on the holodeck while on their way to an important diplomatic mission.
Holodeck episode!
There you go! Holodeck episode.
Excited for it.
Oh my God. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to be so
engaged.
Wow, we're really pushing it now.
We're making it so.